Hello everyone and welcome to another video. Now today we're going to play or try to play Call of Duty Black Ops 6 without a discrete graphics card. We did this with the beta, but today it's the turn of the full release. To do that I'll be using this, one of my favourite mini PCs, the Beelink SER5. It's got a 6-core Ryzen 5560U, 16GB of 3200MHz DDR4 and a 512GB SSD. It doesn't use top of the line 780 or 890M graphics, just Radeon graphics according to GPU-Z, which run at 1600MHz. I feel this machine represents a more budget-friendly iGPU gaming experience, and hitting acceptable frame rates will be more of a challenge. The first thing to do in game was to wait for the shader preloading. On this system it took about 10 minutes, but times will vary depending on your hardware. I then set all the graphics options to their respective lowest before running the in-game benchmark tool in an attempt to figure out which upscaling method gave us the best frame rate. We have Intel XeSS, Nvidia Image Scaling, FSR1 and FSR3, along with Fidelity FX CAS sharpening. I cycled through these using the same performance preset. XeSS and FSR3 also have ultra performance presets, but these didn't really help us out. Nvidia Image Scaling actually gave us the best frame rate on average, with FSR1 close behind. I also tried the dynamic resolution option, setting a 60fps target, but this was pretty useless. Out of the two best performing options, Nvidia Image Scaling looks the best, but in the end I chose to drop the native render resolution to 50%, as well as set Fidelity FX CAS sharpening to 50. We could go lower to 37% render scale, but it's too harsh on the eyes, in my opinion. I feel as though 50% scale and 50% sharpening with no upscaling isn't too horrible to look at, and it still gives us 40 FPS or more, a middle ground I've become accustomed to thanks to my time with the Steam Deck. At this point I was also convinced that we'd get better frame rates during actual gameplay, because our hardware wouldn't be battered by constant action like it is in the benchmark run. Sure enough it was, but performance will depend on the map. I stuck with the same settings, which was 50% of 1080p and 50% sharpening. In my opinion, and considering the hardware, this was a sort of decent experience. We even saw at least 60 FPS on occasion. Now as you can see here, we're hitting at least 40 frames per second on average. There are some dips and drops here and there, and it's not the most consistent experience in the world, but I don't honestly think it's too bad. We could certainly benefit from more RAM. With this system we have just 16GB of DDR4. I'll have to see if I can upgrade it at some point, and don't forget that we have assigned a dedicated amount of that to our graphics segment of the entire chip. So although we have 16GB, 4 is reserved for the iGPU, which means the system itself is working with 12. Now we can either leave this at auto in the BIOS, but I prefer to choose a set amount. I'm not sure if it's all in my head or not, but it does seem to me that it runs better if you choose a set amount from the BIOS instead. Now as you can see from the VRAM and VRAM usage, we're being assigned about 2 gigs with these settings, and we're using just under 1.9, so I don't think selecting 4GB of VRAM here was such a bad shout, to be honest, with this machine, but we could probably benefit from more of the stuff and perhaps some faster memory as well. Now the Beelink SER5 is one of my favourite mini PCs simply for the fact that it is more affordable, and I think it's a decent choice if you want to play some light games and you want a system that's relatively quiet under load, as this one is. I'm not trying to promote this here, I mean it's quite an old system now, but it's one of my favourites for those reasons. And as you can see, it's not just light games that it can handle if you're willing to make some pretty hefty sacrifices. As for the gameplay itself, well, I don't think I'm too bad at Call of Duty. Anything else, I mean CS2, don't talk to me about it, I'll be wiped out every 5 seconds. But when it comes to Call of Duty, especially this new one, Black Ops 6 here, I don't seem to be doing too bad. although you've probably seen me get wiped out a good few times now. This is the first map I tested, can't quite remember what it was called, but as you can see, our Radeon iGPU is maxed out in terms of usage and clock speed as well. The temperature is sitting at around 70 to 75 degrees for the system, not too hot, all things considered. I'll definitely have to see if I can upgrade the memory and see if that helps, and if you want me to, I'll test some other hardware further down the line as well to see how it copes. But let's move on to a different map now and observe some of the performance changes that you may see within this game. So here we are in another map that I've forgotten the name of, funnily enough, but if you look at the frame rate counter on the centre left of your screen, you'll see that on occasion, actually more than on occasion in this map, we are seeing at least 60 frames per second. I'll have the exact averages and the percentile lows up on screen as I always do. Once again, I'm not doing too shockingly in this game. This is a sort of more lightweight map, I think, on the system, as you can see from the performance numbers. Don't get me wrong, there are still moments when we drop to the low 40s, high 30s, but it is doing better overall this time around. Once again, our iGPU is maxing out at 98-99% utilization. The GPU clock is 1600 megahertz. Perhaps we could overclock it a little bit, but we have to be careful of temperatures as part of a smaller system like this. You will find laptops as well with similar processors that are going to offer similar performance. I think the 5600U, not the 5560U, does have slightly better integrated GPU specs, so that's worth bearing in mind. Of course, we have things like the aforementioned 890M, 780M as well, which are going to do very well, a lot better, probably 60 FPS native with respectable settings, low or medium I would imagine, but that's not challenging enough in my opinion. I decided to go for something more middle of the road, more budget, to truly get a sense of whether or not we could play on more affordable hardware, and I don't honestly think it's a terrible experience, same as the beta version, to be honest. That ran okay as well, and it's nice to see the full release still doing so for any of you that want to give it a go with more lightweight or affordable hardware, that is. Lots of you watching probably have got a laptop right now, so hopefully this will help you out. Now, I haven't got around to testing Intel graphics yet, more specifically ARC graphics, but every time I've done so in the past with Call of Duty games, I have experienced some weird graphical glitches, like sort of coloured squares all over the place. It must be the way that the engine reacts to the iGPU. Whether or not it's a driver problem that hasn't been resolved yet, I'm not too sure, but I'll have to look into it, perform some more tests. I wanted to get this initial test out today because I think a lot of you will be buying this, or for those of you that are buying it, of course, it may be helpful to you, especially if you have a lower end system. In terms of RAM usage, as I said before, we're left with about 12 gigs of the stuff, and not all of that is actually being assigned here or used by the system. Our RAM usage is reading about 8.5 gigs and RAM utilization is reading about 3.5 at these settings, which doesn't quite seem right to me, but there we go. The GPU is also obviously the limiting factor in this scenario, which is what we wanted really, to get a full sense of how the Radeon iGPU performs. But all in all, it's been a surprising experience. When I first jumped into this and tried to run it at native 1080p, we were seeing about 15 FPS, so I wasn't sure if we'd be able to get this playable, but using a mix of Fidelity FX CAS sharpening, as well as half of 1080p render scale, we've got a game that doesn't look too horrible, as well as one that runs okay considering the circumstances too. Thank you for watching, leave your thoughts down below, and hopefully I'll see you all in the next one. Let me know if there's any other hardware, integrated graphics or otherwise, that you'd like me to test with this game. Thanks, and I'll see you next time.